Thomas Frank has an interesting piece suggesting explicitly, and I've said this actually last week. I said I think that if Trump runs for re-election, there's a very good chance he'll get re-elected. And Thomas Frank is making that case as well. And he's basically making the case, arguing that it won't be so much that Trump is so great, but that the Democratic Party won't step up and reclaim their talking points. Trump ran on, these trade deals suck, and that was, traditionally the Democratic Party's position, and still is the position of progressives in the Democratic Party. And there's a few other issues as well. Health care for all. Donald Trump said he was going to make sure that everybody was insured and it would be cheaper than Obamacare, and that helped get him elected. And Democrats need to coalesce around some of these issues. So do you think Donald Trump would be reelected or could be reelected in 2020? Or if he ran today, do you think so? And then in that context, a few other questions. Number one, the idea of organized money now running our government. This is a serious one. Scott Pruitt, the tool of the fossil fuel industry, and has been for a long, long time. Scott Pruitt is blowing up science over at the EPA. He has taken this position, and he's using the rubric of transparency. He says we can't use scientific reports that aren't, quote, transparent, end quote. Now, what the heck does he mean by that? Well, what he means by that is that if there is any information in a study that cannot be made public, then you can't use that study. So when the CDC does a survey of thousands of physicians and finds out, how many cases of lung cancer there are in coal country versus the rest of the nation, because the individual doctors are not identified, and because the individual patients' confidentiality is being respected and their names are not included in the study, Scott Pruitt won't allow the study to be considered when the EPA is making policy, which means that virtually all of the public health research that's been done in the last 50 years that has shown us how lead in paint damages young kids' brains, which has shown us how particulate pollution, from everything from power plants to automobiles to cracking oil and turning it into gasoline, that all of those things, all of the studies that show us that those things cause cancer and asthma, none of those studies can be used. Mark Sumner, writing over at the Daily Kos about this today, says, under the pretense of transparency, Scott Pruitt is preparing to radically reduce the number of studies that can be used in setting EPA policy. This will include disallowing data from many reports concerning health effects of pollutants and contaminants in the environment. The ruling would not just block new studies, but eliminate the use of landmark reports that have long been used to limit human exposure to toxins, opening the door for a massive rollback of much of the environmental progress over the last 50 years. What we're seeing right now with the Trump presidency, and I think this, again, goes to this question of can he be reelected, because he's going to have this kind of money and power behind him, right? The Kochs are and their buddies are very, very happy with what Scott Pruitt is doing, rolling back these regulations, these protections for you and me. And I would remind the Democrats of the guy who created the modern Democratic Party, the 20th century and 21st century Democratic Party. It would be Franklin Roosevelt. What he had to say about the corrosive influence of money in politics. Here he is.
We had to struggle with the old enemies of peace, business and financial monopoly, speculation, reckless banking, class antagonism, sectionalism, war profiteering. They had begun to consider the government of the United States as a mere appendage to their own affairs. And we know now that government by organized money is just as dangerous as government by organized mob.
So, will the Democrats start talking about this and like this, using this kind of framing and this kind of conversation? Will they do that again? Because if they do, I believe they can easily beat Donald Trump. And frankly, if they had, in a really aggressive and credible way in the last election, they would have beaten Donald Trump. So, number one. There's a couple of other pieces to this too. Apparently, if you are Muslim, it's not possible to be mentally ill. That's what I'm getting out of the news coverage. Yesterday, for a brief window, it looked like, or there was this story out there, that the guy in Toronto who ran his car into a group of people was Muslim. And in fact, I mean, they've on MSNBC, they even had Dino Badala on going, who's Muslim himself, saying, this is not a good thing. But once they figured out that he wasn't Muslim, then suddenly they started talking about how he was mentally ill. Now, there are some reports, and these are absolutely unconfirmed, but they're all over the internet. And in fact, one of the McDonald Global says we're working on verifying this Facebook post. Alec Minassian was the guy yesterday who drove the car. And according to what appears to be one of his Facebook posts, he says, Catherine McDonald says, we've just obtained this Facebook post from the accused Alec Minassian, suspected of the Young and Finch mass casualty, posted early this afternoon. What he says is, Private Recruit Minassian, Infantry 0010, wishing to speak to Sergeant 4chan, please. The incel rebellion has already begun. Now, incel are young men who are involuntarily celibate. In other words, women won't sleep with them. Now, you will recall, no, seriously, you will recall that Mr. Roger, the terrorist in Santa Barbara, who back in 2014, went out and on a rampage and killed 6 people, saying that because of his status as a virgin, he wanted to take revenge on his sexually active peers, Elliot Rodger is the guy's name, and so then over at We Hunted the Mammoth, the question, they're referring to him as Saint Elliot. Right, these young men who can't find women to sleep with them because they're so crazy or so right-wing or whatever. And they're calling themselves incels. So, is that mental illness or is that terrorism? Well, apparently, according to the media, you can only be a terrorist if you're a Muslim. Even though over 70% of terrorist incidents that have involved, the death of Americans have been done by right-wingers, and only about 15%, or excuse me, only about 25 or 30% have been done, less than 30%, fewer than 30% have been done by Muslims. So, is this meme going to continue? Is Trump going to continue successfully to promote and have it picked up in the media? The idea that the only terrorists out there are Muslims. And don't worry about those white power guys. They're just good Republicans.